maybe the difference between rock climbing and just working out and training is that in a sport, you want to make something as easy as possible. But when we're working out, we often try to make things as hard as possible. We say, stiffen up your core for this push up, make it like a plank, a really hard push up versus just what's the easiest way you can do a push up. And so recognizing that we're trying to make things easier, not necessarily get stronger. All right, Tim, my dude, how's it going, man?
Josh, what's up? I feel like it's been a minute. Actually, it has totally been a minute since
Tim,
we've recorded.
literally on my notes, I was like, I should say it's been a minute. Well, I think what we should explain the behind the scenes where we don't always podcast every week. Schedules are crazy. And so sometimes we compress a bunch. Sometimes dude, I have this podcast and the next week I have 3 podcasts in a row. Well, each a different day, but I'm kind of stressed. They're not all Testpiece podcasts, but a lot of them are. And yeah, that's going to be brutal, but I'm psyched. I love podcasting. I love seeing you. So it's been a minute and I'm glad we're back.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that, yeah, next week is for sure gonna be brutal for you. It's hard to talk like a lot, even though you like it, and I'm sure they'll turn out really good. I have to just share that it is hard to talk like a lot and a lot and a lot. And I mean, I'm only podcasting with you, but I'm coaching all the time, and just coming from different conversations, and yeah, it gets exhausting. So good job, Josh. Thanks for doing it for us.
Well, we
Thanks
we
for
do have
providing
a
the
we do have a really good guest coming. I'm not gonna no spoilers, but we do have a damn good guest that we're recording
yeah.
with next week. And it's funny because I'm sure you get this with coaching too. This happens in climbing. When you do something that you love, you just fall into this flow. You're excited. You have that energy, and then you end it. You end your session, and you're just exhausted. You think, just 5 minutes ago, I was trying my hardest. I felt great. I'm one of those people who can just keep trying their projects, and I just
hmm
keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and then I get done, and I'm wrecked. I'm like, oh, I haven't eaten in like 8 hours. What am I doing? Yeah.
I'm the exact same. I don't get hungry, I don't get tired, like, but if no matter even if I'm doing a short burst of effort for like an hour, like a coaching session or like a project session or something, I'll still be exhausted. I can do that for a really, really long time and do it back to back to back, but I'll crash from every single coaching session. And then if I have to go into another one though, because someone's scheduled, I'm like, all right, wake up, like we're good. Like, it's all totally fine to start getting back into it, but I totally crash super, super hard. It's crazy how much like you put so much effort into these conversations, and especially these podcasts are topics that we really, really care about. So, it's fun. It's fun to go deep into these things, but I'm thinking so much harder than I'm thinking about most things in my life. So thinking that's hard.
This is one of the things I've struggled with getting older and the training that I do is that sometimes I'll not feel so great. I'll be tired from whatever life is throwing at me. And I start my training session and then you feel warmed up. Like you're saying, you just all of a sudden it's go time and you're having a blast. And that's how I overtrain or that's how I do too much. And it happens to me fairly often. I think that's being older, I want to say. Like I have that mindset of I get psyched, I get warmed up and I push it. But sometimes you need to recognize that you're tired. And just because you can have that dump of adrenaline, you can all of a sudden say, no, I got this. There's a balance there. And I don't know, if you feel that at your age. But actually, I even remember because when I was
I
your age,
100% agree.
yeah, when I was your age, I was working crazy 100-hour weeks in finance, and I would show up, maybe even after drinking too much the night before, and just go super hard. And then, sometimes I'd be wrecked for work the next day, and I'd be wrecked for climbing, and it was just, you only have so much to give, and I think I was talking about this. Yeah, I was messaging with a patron, and just this reminder that if you're tired and trying to balance everything, that sometimes just pushing harder is not the answer. You do want to overreach a little bit, but just showing up and thinking like, oh, I just gotta be like Rocky and show up again and again and again. Yeah, long term consistency at a moderate level is better than short bursts of high intensity and then burning out.
100%. Yeah,
Good.
that goes really hand in hand with our topic for the day. And, the last thing I'll say, and just agreeing with you in that I've valued, I think in the last like 2 or 3 years of my life, I think before that, I really didn't care. Like as a teenager or like going into my early 20s or like, going into 20 and 21, 22, I really didn't care, especially because like during COVID, I was like, all right, like if we're going to work out, we just go crazy all the time. Like if we're going to climb, like doesn't matter if I just like, yeah, was hungover the other night or like didn't sleep or like didn't have good skin or like that, those things didn't matter. But I think I'm in a place where quality really, really, really matters to me. And like it almost doesn't matter if I show up for the session if I don't show up perfectly right now. Or if I show up for that's not true because like I'll show up session almost never perfect, but if I show up for the session and I can't give more than X percent, then that session doesn't feel very worth it to me. And that comes from different places, and it usually comes from like how I feel walking up to the session, and how I feel walking up to the session usually relates to how much work I've just done. And so I've been valuing like putting more energy into setting up for my sessions and going into a really high quality session. And yeah, again, that goes hand in hand with what we're going to talk about today and the
Well,
importance of that. But
I have this note that I was gonna bring up later on, but it's just too perfect to not fit in right now. And it's that little anecdote I talked about with you about Dave McLeod. And Dave McLeod, I've spoken about him a lot in here. He's maybe one of my favorite climbing content. He's a coach. He's an older guy. He's just I don't know if you haven't looked up Dave McLeod. His YouTube is money. His books are money. Great guy. And one of the things that stood out in my head is I think he has a degree in exercise phys and he's a coach and he really is obsessed with training. I'd say he's not a naturally strong guy. He's not someone who just got burly. He really earned it over decades. And he was talking about finger training, and you can apply this to all training. And basically, he points out that the science is not totally settled on you need to do this much intensity and this many sets and reps and RPE, rated perceived effort, and that is some magical formula that puts out the best results. And people listening to this might have knowledge around weightlifting and the Russian method and periodization, and there is science around this. I'm not saying that there's no better way to do things, but it's not clear that there's some best way. And his his takeaway from his experience, and some of this is that end of one anecdote of how he trained, is he had a period early on in his career where he did finger training every day and he saw amazing gains. He does not do finger training every day now. He does it occasionally. I'm sure he's ebbed and flowed and tried many things. And the consistent thread there was the effort and focus he brought to each set and rep. And so, are 3 sets of 10 seconds on the hangboard the same for everyone? Or is it the same for you, Tim, when you're not psyched and not excited? Going in and putting in the reps just because you're supposed to tick it off in that training journal may do nothing. It literally may hurt you, it may add to your fatigue, but that quality you're talking about where you show up and you are there and trying your best and really focused on getting better, perhaps that's the factor that matters the most. And whether it's 3 sets versus four, 2 second hang versus 7 second hang, yes, there's different structural adaptations, but really showing up with the right mindset, super important, and putting your all. And yeah, Tim, we'll connect that later to our topic, but just because of what you said, I had to get, because I love that
yeah,
little anecdote.
it's so good though. Like that's such an underrated thought process that is so simple, and that's like somehow the reason why we overlook it, right? Like how much effort and thought we put into the things that we're doing. I mean, there's no surprise, more lately than ever in my rock climbing, I've been super just like thinking about things. Like, yeah, I used to assume a lot and I used to like make just very like blunt accusations at the world and accusations at training and like different people and different things. And now I'm watching a lot more and like especially the World Cups, kids sending things and like, just watching people in the climbing gym, like watching really strong people at the climbing gym, watching total like beginners at the climbing gym. And I'm like, wow, like climbing is a totally different place. And I'm understanding more and more, but I also am learning how much I do not understand as to like what actually is good and what actually is, going to help for the future. And I'm at the same time paying more attention to myself and just like doing more of it. I mean, I used to, as a kid, like make training plans up like for fun at school, like on my phone, just like write like whole workouts and like see how things would be better. Ask these questions on like basically what we're talking about today. Like, how do you get better at climbing? Like, what should I do to develop myself as a climber? Like, are there drills? Is that more important? Is training more important? Should I hangboard? Should I campus board? And I would do like every single day types of finger training. I had a very similar anecdote where I was like, man, like, yeah, training every single day on my fingers feels amazing. And then like 6 weeks deep into this thing, I would hurt my finger and be like, what? It doesn't feel amazing anymore. Like my fingers hurt now. Like obviously doesn't feel amazing. But, up until that point, it felt amazing. And it's like I learned so many little things about, cycles and training without researching anything, without going to school for anything, just like trying it and failing and trying it and failing and trying it, failing. And then even today, I'm like, I know a lot, but I'll still fail. Like I will still go and try and fail. Like doing training plans is the exact same thing. And what I'm noticing is that the most important thing is exactly what Dave McLeod was saying, because I've done so many different variations of training things and so many different timing intervals and whatnot, and I am growing constantly, right? And something, I've noticed that my rate of growth is faster in some places, and maybe it's not in some other places, but that doesn't necessarily matter. Like I have grown the most comfortably and in a way that I am confident with when I put in tons of intention and just tons of thought and like effort into my sessions. Exactly what he's saying. And maybe not just on the hangboard and lots of different places, but if you are going to do something like hangboarding, which is a really, I don't know, basic tool for training, you're just using this to repeat an engagement on your fingers over and over and over again. Like, yeah, something as simple as that, we should be putting the same amount of effort as, into the moon board, into our project, into our outdoor project. Like it should all be the same thing. It's underrated, right?
Yeah, don't show up and not pay attention. If you don't have the wherewithal to do a limit moonboard session, fine. Recognize that you don't and do something with lesser intensity. But if you aren't focusing on, I don't know what the next step down would be, stretching. Yeah, if you're just saying I'm taking the day off and I'm stretching, pay attention to your stretching. Like it's just pointless to go through the motions. I would say better off taking an easy walk or just yeah. Anyways, little side rant over. Yeah, wow. Okay, yeah, Tim, we just always go so deep so quick. Just okay. Okay, what was I go? I was oh yeah. Tim, before we click record, I really like the shirt you're wearing. I just can you stand up for all the podcasters listening and show your cool shirt? It's going
I'm
on
wearing a
YouTube, I
pusher.
promise. I swear this will go on YouTube at some point.
It's the pusher so high collab shirt. But it's got that cool design, just says pusher on top. And yeah, we love pusher. We had Jared on. Love talking to Jared.
Jared
Yeah,
Roth
I told
episode was mega. Go listen to it. Sorry, keep going, Tim. I just wanted to make sure
yeah,
people know Jared Roth, Pusher, awesome,
yeah, we
awesome
have an
guest.
episode with him. Awesome guy, phenomenal rock climber from not my generation, closer to your generation. He's a little older than you, right?
He's a little older, yeah, but
Yeah,
that's how OG
yeah,
is too. Just for real.
yeah. I got these holds from Jared. I asked him for holds and for discounts or whatever, and he was super, super nice. He was like, "Oh, I got these grips from the '90s that I designed, and I repurposed them with like dual text." And he just decided to send me a box of holds. And I just had to nerd out and show Josh. So I showed Josh, and they're just so. He's like, "I remember grabbing those. Like they're old grips, but these are brand new, and they're for my home wall." So thank you, Jared. Thank you so much. You're a legend, and I'm so excited to climb on these things.
Yeah, and I that shirt was just super cool. I mean, they really put out some of the coolest merch, and I like that it was a collab with Sohai, and that's who Bobby was behind your. He was part of Focus, right? Was he the editor or
He filmed and edited. Yeah, he edited the whole
uh,
thing.
yeah? I mean, that was a cool video. I think people might have heard of that. Good job on that,
Yeah, it's awesome.
Tim and Bobby and Brennan. All right. Well, yeah, I didn't even shower this morning. All for all those listeners, I actually usually show up clean shaven. I'm trying to be sharp for Tim and for our guest. But it's been a crazy couple of weeks here. And Tim, you know what I'm doing right now is I'm building another climbing wall in my garage. I'm adding to the
Oh,
moon board.
what?
Yeah, dude. I got a little 10-degree and maybe some vert terrain too for the kiddos. And I thought it'd be nice to have a little warm up slash circuit area. Cause dude,
Dude, that is
on the
so
moon board,
awesome.
you don't warm up on the moon board. You pull on. I literally just will pull on and then walk my feet around a few times. It's like, okay, I warm up on the hangboard and stuff like that, but
Yeah, yeah,
you don't really do a V4. Oh, like V4s on moonboard are not V4s. And I don't want to warm up on V4. I definitely don't want to
totally.
warm up on moonboard V4. So yeah, that's the
It's a
big news
horrendous
over
warm
here
up.
for me.
Nice, dude. I've always wondered, like, if you were gonna build some lower angle wall at the barn board, you built that side spray wall, but it was like a similar angle, right? It wasn't
Still
as steep.
40. Still
Is that
40.
correct? It's
No,
still
no, it was the
40.
same.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like, yeah, it's way too. But even then, like, if you had a 40 with jugs on it, still a better warm up than moonboard. Like just not engaging all your like flexor tendons and your extensors go crazy from just pinching holds that you're not ready for, like, and you're putting tension onto your feet and stuff, like, yeah, you're good at it, and, like, you and I probably can, like, warm up and look comfortable warming up, but I never feel comfortable. Like, I never feel like everything is firing at the correct, like, curve in my day. Like, I start way too high in my curve where I wanna have good habits. I wanna have, like, very little effort to start my day and, like, but perform good climbing movements and then implement effort as things go on. I was always wondering, like, if you felt that way because you like, pretty much never had access to like, when you were barn boarding all the time, like, dude, this guy literally never warms up, right? Like, how does he do that?
I had a little circuit on the other, side of the wall, that helped me out with some jugs, and just if you're if you're like me and you stay more to your home wall than anything else, it's really nice to have something other than the moon board just to move around and feel good. I can make it work on the moon board, but then when I go somewhere else, I find that I'm overly jumpy, I'm not used to vertical terrain, and I just you get good at what you do, and moon board's a great tool. We have a million episodes on the moon board, and we'll have probably a million more. But let's face it, climbing is more than a 40-degree overhang on those specific holds. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that's approach. It's just if you got Tim, when you build your home wall, make sure you have more than just 40-degree terrain. It's nice.
I just measured my, home like, where I was gonna put my home wall yesterday outside in my backyard, and, I can build a 12 by 12. Which is
Oh,
pretty
nice.
sick. I can build
That's
like an
great.
entire kilter board. Yeah, it's pretty a lot bigger than I thought I would be able to build. But it's probably gonna be like 35 to 40 degrees, like not 40 degrees. And personally, I don't like climbing at 40 degrees as my only angle. Like I climb on that angle a ton and I climb at 45 and 50 a ton, but my personal favorite angle is about 30 degrees. That's like my personal favorite climbing angle. But it's if it was the same holds as the kilter board and moonboard stuff, like, obviously, I wouldn't wanna climb on 30 degrees because those are holds are, like, probably too good, but I like climbing on bad holds, like, not necessarily bad crimps and stuff, but, like, bad slopers and bad pinches. Like, I really like moving my body, like, go listen to that Sloper Love podcast if you guys don't know what I'm talking about. You're like, "What? Tim's an idiot." Like, those are not fun, but, like, what's fun is positions in climbing. What's fun is, like, what's possible, and you have way quicker access to that stuff on slopier grips, and you just don't have to be, like, grabbing heinous things and doing super like things just feel hard where it's like, oh, I just don't think that's super likely. But that's different than like, oh, that's heinous. Like I can't even pull on it, like that's totally different.
Tim, you're totally right. And my favorite angle is probably 60 or something like that. But it's because my kryptonite is around that 15 to 30 degrees where you can actually use micros. You can almost treat 10, 15, 20 degrees like vertical climbing in a way if you're really good with technique and really know how to put weight on your feet. And the things people can hang on just blow my mind. But I really struggle on that, and that's actually I wanted to do a 15-degree overhang, but it just made my garage feel a little closed in because I knew that would be really great training for me to get the absolute most tiny grips and just learn how to really flow on them instead of just grabbing big holds and swinging between them like an ape. Um,
Totally.
yeah. Okay. That's my new home wall. I'm freaking psyched. I'm also psyched to get my kids, climbing. They're aching for it, even though they're just little groms.
Really?
Oh yeah, dude. They will. I should show you these videos. It's so funny. Kids mimic exactly what you do. So of course I brush my board. Uh, thank you, ravioli bites. I brush my freaking board, and my daughter does the cutest thing where she'll grab the brush and then brush the hold, and then she'll chalk up and go, "Oh, wait," and then brush it some more, and then just go in this cycle of brushing, and it's very cute. So yeah,
Oh, it's so perfect.
they keep asking about me building a climbing wall for them, so I'm doing it.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome.
Okay, Tim, before we leave our fun banter section of the podcast, did you watch that latest Majorca video by Jakob Schubert, the Espontis one? Please tell me you did. I
I
sent it
didn't
to you.
finish it, but I watched part of it.
How could you
For
turn
some
that
reason I
off?
thought
I don't understand how you could turn it
I
off. It's so
was
good.
writing notes for our podcast, actually,
Oh,
that's what
okay.
happened.
Okay.
But, I didn't realize it was the second part to a video that you already sent me before, and so I was, like, watching it, I was like, "Didn't I already watch this?" But it's just it's dude, it's legendary footage, though. It is, like hands down some of the best climbing footage, period. But of Majorca, like, how could you get stoked with any other footage? Like, it's so, so pretty. And it's Jakob Schubert, like, arguably one of the best sport climbers in the world of all time, and
He's
he's just
incredible.
out there crushing.
He really show I mean, I knew how incredible he was, but the way he does these climbs and with the quickness and when he got through I actually don't want to spoil it. He climbs very well. And I just
Yeah.
I one of the reasons why I bring it up is I remember when we did our 22 review and 23 predictions, our you know our year, our we did on New Year's or whatever, and I just pointed out that I felt like climbing media has leveled up, and it just
Mm.
watching videos like that blow my mind. It's 30 minutes. Focus is in this category too. It is so different from that grainy footage of, yes, it's send porn where it's cool seeing someone pull down hard, but it just blows my mind how beautiful, and some new YouTube drops by Jakob Schubert. It could be Seb, it could be Alamandra, Stefano. These are just YouTube videos that come out every couple of weeks or maybe a month. And if those had come out 10 years ago, we would have just watched them on repeat for, all year. And so I just love seeing videos like that. So if anyone hasn't watched that, go watch it. And it has, it has my favorite climb in Mallorca has the best footy on it that I've ever seen. And so it was meaningful to me because I don't know, made my palms sweat and dream of Mallorca days again.
Yeah, that I think I've heard you say La Ostia so many times, especially since we started podcasting, and when you sent me that video link, it went straight to La Ostia. I was like, "Ah," like, I mean, I get it. Like, I've never climbed on it, I've never been there, but, like, I want to now.
Wait,
Like,
did I?
that looks
Okay.
amazing.
It's funny. So both sorry, not sorry, but I must have, how you can share it at a certain time, like a
Yeah,
YouTube at a certain
yeah.
time. I definitely shared it to my mom. At that clip, I said, "Mom, you guys, this was like the coolest climb I think I've ever done." And then I just copied that link and sent it to you. So I probably yeah, watch the whole thing, but yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
gotta
know.
go there,
So what I
do that
what I
thing.
meant to
You'll love
say
it.
is I watched it from La Ostia to the end, and then I started my notes, and I was like, "Okay, I'll watch it again another time." But it obviously didn't happen because I went deep in the notes, and the notes are crazy because our podcast is gonna be crazy.
All right. And that's the end of that segment unless you got
Oh,
something to
actually,
add.
I did wanna say, I just wanna double back on what you're saying about climbing media in general, and, yeah, mostly just that I am impressed with what's going on right now. It's just been interesting, like, I think a lot of people are probably noticing this, like, I think what's crazy to me is navigating it, like, going on YouTube and then now finding climbing media. It used to be very, very easy just to, like, literally type in the search bar, like, LT11, Big Up Productions, like, something from the past, USAC, GoPro, slow-mo, edit or whatever. Like, there was not very many things that would be, any climbing media that existed was you would probably go and see all of it. And now there's so much climbing media, right? And like the vast majority of it is people sharing their experiences, which doesn't necessarily count as, what the old climbing media, well, I don't know necessarily what I'm calling it, but I think you guys know what I'm saying. Like, it's a huge difference between like what we were trying to do with Focus and what people kind of put out in content. And to be fair, like Ross and Tim vlogs, like that type of content was supposed to be more of the generic content that you see on YouTube where people were just like living climbing lives and sharing that. But there is so much of that now, and it's so saturated on YouTube that you can't really find, and views don't reflect how good a climbing film is, right? Or like how good for just climbing media it is. You can click something that has 200,000 views, and you're like, wait, dude, where is the climbing? Like, where is the proging? Where's the sending? Where's the sick B roll? Like, where's all this stuff? It's just this person who's super, super popular. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that is also another fascinating part of climbing media. But I just want to kind of reiterate what you were saying, where like this climbing media is awesome, and like that's a huge level up, and that's totally awesome.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we're
there's a lot of
calling out.
climbers who probably listen
I was just gonna say we're
or just
calling
the
out specifically
yeah,
because it's so freaking good. Just you gotta
yeah,
watch that. And you're right that there's so much high quality stuff out there that doesn't always mean it's good. But on the flip side, there's sometimes things yeah, that are high quality, don't get the views and are really good. And I want to shout out Connor Herson and that what was it, La Sportiva? I can't remember who sponsored that video, but
Empath,
called
yeah,
yeah,
Lost
Empath.
Ortiva.
And we had him on right after that call. It was called Traditional or something like
Traditional
that.
at heart.
It was so good. It was just I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, if you guys haven't watched that one, please do. Yeah, man, climbing media are really good. It's funny
Awesome.
because it makes me think of how I used to go onto Climbing Narc, and I don't know if you remember Climbing Narc, but it's like you could just go there
I
and
never
that would
watched.
be it was more like an aggregator. It was just a news site. It was a climbing news site, and I would
Oh,
say
okay.
that
I
you
didn't
could
know
get
that one.
all of it. You could get all that was relevant from that one site. He would, link you to whatever happened, and so now that is freaking impossible. There is no one source for
Yeah,
everything because people are just doing great stuff all the time. So thanks, world. I love
yeah.
it. Okay, Tim. Okay. Um, Last week we had Eric Jerome on the podcast, and it was definitely like an interesting topic that was I don't know why we're so I think that we're unique, maybe even just in the podcast world that I'd say we're not quite as obsessed with grades. I mean, of course, we all want to get stronger, but and Eric just has this interesting approach to climbing. I thought was really fun. This idea of star quality, what makes something good, and yeah, having to actually define what makes a boulder good. And one of the big things for me is when I hopped on the phone with Jamie Emerson before that podcast, and thanks to Jamie for prepping me, was learning about how the star quality rating even came to be. That was like an awesome history lesson that I really enjoyed. And seeing uh, Eric take up the mantle of trying to figure out what makes a boulder objectively a good boulder was just I just thought it was really fun. It's a topic that I've
Yeah.
riffed on for years with you and everyone else. So yeah, just thanks to Eric for taking up that mantle, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it's cool that, like, we're just acknowledging a lot of this game that we already play and, like, really enjoy, and, like, you've put 25 years into this game that you play, and, I kinda came in and 30? Did
Yeah,
you say 30 years?
yeah, I'm about 30 now. Yeah.
You've been
So
climbing for, like, 30 years?
yeah, let's
Holy
I
cow,
wanna hit
dude.
this out. It makes me feel like I look, or I'm older than I really am because I just started really, really, really young. But yeah, dude,
Mhm,
more
yeah,
I think I
but you
think
also
around
look
8.
yeah, you look way younger than you actually are, dude, like, that's crazy to me every time I think about you're in your late 30s and you're a dad and stuff, like, you still look exactly the same as when I met you,
Sweet.
in every possible way.
That's that
No
that
hair color
healthy
change,
that healthy living
no
of
skin change.
climbing, being outside. That's dude, climbing makes you, stay healthy for longer. That's one of my problems whenever I get hurt and I don't climb as much. My diet goes to hell. I have to
Mm,
have that North Star of performance to really keep me in line. So, okay,
man,
sorry, I interrupt you.
such
I'm
a good pro tip. No
been
worries.
climbing for a long time, but yeah, it's a game that
Yeah.
I've been keep on going. Sorry, man.
Well, it's crazy because the game that I played, when I started climbing was mostly about development, right? Like most or developing in myself, development in myself. That's what most people really are interested in, right? Everyone gets started and they're like, what can I do? Like, there's V grid. Wow, like I can go from V0 to V1 and like I did my first V4. I gotta send this V5 now. Like, how do I level up? And it was more about the level up than about how to level up, for sure. Again, this is exactly in line with our topic for the day. But it became more nuanced and more refined in what I enjoyed. And it did become a lot about the quality of climbing that I was doing, the fun in movements. Like, there are different climbs and different movements and different hold types. And, for me, it became a different game. But it did sound like this conversation opened my eyes even more to even more of an objective layer on why things are better, right, in climbing. And it's like you and Eric were telling me a lot about, like, why this stuff is better, and I was like, "Oh, it's interesting." Like, I already have a way of navigating this stuff when I'm climbing or going to areas and, like, finding better rock climbs, but I didn't necessarily have a good way of, like, deconstructing that, so I will definitely be using Eric's, like, top 100, website or, the 100 best or, what's the website gonna be called? The top 100
Top 100
dot
dev right now, but I think he said that it's gonna transfer over to top 100 best.
dot
We'll link
best. That
we'll
would be
link in the
so
show
epic.
notes. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I told I thought it would be so cool to be able to navigate climbing areas with, like, what are the best rock climbs and, like, maybe, because we're always doing, like, what are these grades or whatever, but it's like, sometimes I don't care, like, it's so
So
well,
we should just come up with the top 100 softest climbs because that's how I'm going to navigate different places. Okay, okay. Actually,
isn't
when
that what people kind of want in some way, like,
we were going, actually
accidentally?
totally reminded me we were going to come up with a website called like 7b.new, like the boulder, like all
Uh,
the for the average climber, just making fun of. Anyways, yeah, yeah. A lot of people do
but
seek
that's
out
an
the best.
unfortunate
Yeah.
right, that's an
Wait, no, I said
unfortunate thing
soft.
where,
I
like
meant soft. Yeah, a lot of people do seek out
right,
the
right.
soft, and don't be one of those people. Well, I don't know. Anyways, sorry. All right, total
Well, in some
tangent. Keep
ways,
going. Keep going.
that could be yeah, that's so hard for me because it's like was definitely one of those people. I think that there's a great part of playing that game in terms of your development as a climber. Like there's, it's super beneficial to you to be like, all right, what is the softest new grade that I can climb? Because it's a great place to start. You might as well go for that and then decide. But it can definitely just be a lot of traps, which is why we make fun of it, right? Where it's like, oh, well, if you get stuck there and you grow an ego because you think you can climb this grade, then you're like, there's no way you can go through that path. You're gonna be so humbled like right after that, and that's why it can be harmful. But it's still a good way to follow the game, of course, like finding those grades. But anyway, when I go to a new crag or like a new area, I need to calibrate to those grades anyway. Like I need to understand what V4 is in an area, or like V9 is in an area, or like V12 is in an area. They're all different. They are all different because those grades are not. We have to like understand that grades aren't objective. Like people don't use a scale. People don't use necessarily like objective metrics to define what a grade is. And if you're going to make that integral part of your experience, then you're going to run into issues, I think, just period. And so if
Yeah.
if I had a way of going to an area and being like, okay, yeah, I want to chase some grades, but what are these other really, 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 really good boulders? Like these experts say these are the best boulders in this area. Like, aren't those the climbs that should be the most popular for all of us to do? Like, that would be a
Well,
phenomenal way of finding climbing.
so this is what really got me about the podcast. What I really took away from it is it just made me start wondering why I climb or what am I seeking. And I had argued for a long time that I want to do the most beautiful boulders. It's all about beautiful boulders, and that was kind of this mantra I had just said. I think my tick list suggests that I sought out these classic beautiful lines. But then when I was talking to Eric, I realized that that wasn't what I was looking for exactly. Because when he talked about the Revenant or something, which looks this
Mm.
amazing climb out in the middle of nowhere, and I wasn't that psyched on. Like it just made me ask myself if there was a 6-star boulder in the forest and no one knew about it, and I got to climb on it, and I just did it by myself. Like, would it be great? Yes. Yeah,
Mm.
it would be great. Would it be is it exactly what I'm looking for? And it just isn't. And I think that the things that stick out in my head as being some of my favorite climbs in my life have this subjective quality. They're not objectively amazing, or actually all of them are objectively amazing, but that's not what it was. It's this moment. It can be the sequence, and maybe sometimes climbs just seem to set up these moments where they're really exciting and special. And I know I talk about evolution way too much, but I'm gonna bring it up again because it has this media behind it, but then even the climb itself, it's kind of like a juggier thing to a lip, and then when it gets tall, it becomes delicate. And so that whole experience of going from bigger holds, more gymnastic climbing to technical off the deck climbing, I think I would argue leads you to more likely have an interesting experience where if it was just a jug haul at the top, uh, it would just be not as scary. And does that mean it might be a better climb, quote unquote, star rating if it was like that, or that has no bearing on it, basically, is that doesn't factor into star quality as if it was juggy at the top. But those delicate moves, or I really like this climb called Funky Tut in Bishop, and it's a V3 and it's a little bit of a traverse. and you have this dime-sized edge that you have to really commit to and stand on to go to this finishing jug. It's not super tall or crazy, but I remember doing that climb early in my climbing career, and V3 was not supposed to be that hard for me, but it was just this very interesting moment of trusting a foot like that that I hadn't encountered before. And so, yeah, I guess I wrote in my notes. We've been laughing about this behind the scenes, but it's kind of the eponymous name. It's a test piece. Like, what is a test piece? And we don't really know, and we're not going to try to define it right here. But there's some kind of thing that goes on, I think, for all of us in climbing, that it's not just about standing beneath a boulder and being awed by it. There's something more to it. There's the media you saw before, the stories you heard about, your buddy breaking his foot on it or something, and it creates this whole aura. And then that experience you had in that moment, where right as you topped out, it started hailing, or whatever the case may be. And it's just interesting trying to really dig deep and understand, why do we climb? Well, what are we looking for? What's the experience we want to have? And so that's why I really appreciate about that podcast with Eric, is it made me think a lot.
Yeah, what I hear from that, which is super cool, is it balanced your perspective in the other way where it's like, okay, these are cool to look at boulders that are just objectively good, but that really isn't the experience that I care about, right? Like that's a cool part of the experience, but the experience that really matters is the experience that you have per rock climb. And like, yeah, Funky Tut, I always like if there's someone new that I take to Bishop, I'm like, let's go to the Tut boulders. Like or the birthday boulders first, and then we go to the Tut boulders probably right after that, or like Ironman Traverse because also a very, very hard V4 if you're like not really used to that style. But Funky Tut is so exposed, and that last move that you stand onto that dime is it's not just hard to trust your foot, it's scary. That's like a huge part of that boulder is that if your foot blows, you feel like you're gonna cheese grate. You kind of reach into no holds after that. Like you kind of just like reach into a position and then you kind of just commit into it. Like I think Funky Tut is phenomenal rock climbing. And yeah, you can get kind of lost in this V3 thing where you're like, but it shouldn't be that hard, yada yada. And then as soon as you shut up and as soon as you're like, okay, but how do I get through this? And what do I need to do to get through this? You realize that you maybe weren't capable of doing something like that before. And it only takes about a V3 level for you to unlock that. It's never going to feel really easy. It's never really going to feel that comfortable, but it's not that difficult to unlock that. It's just scary if you don't have that unlocked. I think that's the whole like thing that encompasses rock climbing as an experience for me. And so I'm looking for those challenges. And yeah, I personally agree with you. Like my personal stance in rock climbing is find test pieces more than best boulders. But it was interesting to go into it with Eric. And it was really interesting. If you guys listen to that podcast, we kind of interview him about that too. Like, have you found that the best boulders are your best experience? He'll be like, no, like, absolutely not. And sometimes it's the worst boulders that are the best experience, right? And it's cool to like really break that whole experience down for all of us. And, Eric is an expert. I've been climbing with him for a really long time, or, I met him like, when I started climbing it basically. And like we obviously he's been climbing super super hard for a long time, and it's not just this experience that he lives for, but he's been taking time to lean into that experience and really deconstruct it. We're not here saying that he only cares about the best boulders, and that's not the point of the podcast. But I agree with you. It was really interesting to kind of like see the perspectives that actually matter to us. And yeah, climbing is cool, not just because we can do these pretty things, but because we can experience, you know, ups and downs and discomfort and overcoming those things and then experiencing like the beauty of a challenge. Like you're saying, evolution is so cool because it changes style as you go on, and you have to kind of wake up for that style. You have to match that style in order for you to experience that, and that's phenomenal as well. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, well said, man. Yeah. I don't want to say that star quality is divorced from climbing entirely. I think one of the reasons why I like climbing is this moment when I was maybe 5 years old and I was in Yosemite for the first time. My dad's walking me along the trail, and I'm, just being a little guy. And he turns around and points out El Cap, and he says, "Oh, that's El Cap." And this has got to be one of my earlier memories. And I remember him saying, "People climb that." And it just got me, where it's like that's some of that star quality where you stand beneath something
Mm.
and you just say, "People climb this?" And whatever that means to you, I think is special. And so, yeah, if you want to follow along on Eric's journey on that, you can go find his YouTube channel. I think it's just at Eric Jerome, but I'll link in the notes again, or it's in the last one's notes. And he does Quest for the Best on there, where he's really looking for some of these top climbs and breaking them down. And yeah, I think we mentioned the website is, I think it's top100.dev or .best. And yeah, I mean, it's just a fun journey that he's on. And I just appreciate him sharing it with us. So go check that one out and tell us what you think about test pieces and why you climb. And Tim, I think that I can we move on to the next segment? Is that anything more
Yeah,
about Mr. Eric Jerome? Actually, props to him for just sending Forever Endeavor, that new V14/15 that looks
new
mega.
FA.
Yeah, really cool. Um, all right, man. On to the announcement section. Actually, I just want to say before I go into the announcements, it's just we've got have a ton of new patrons that have joined, both at the lower tier, that's just like a $5 thank you tier, and at our higher tier where people are doing classrooms. I just want to say thank you to them because I get so many nice messages. I try to share them with you sometimes, Tim, but I don't know. We get a lot of them. It's just, it really is great to have people support us and then send us messages saying that they like what we're doing and ask questions and, have questions for guests. And just wanted to take the time to say thank you because we've gotten a lot of new ones in the past, month or so. And yeah, thank you to everyone who are supporting us and thanks for the nice messages. And if anyone else, if you're not a supporter, we would love to have you on. But even if not, thanks for listening. Just a big thank you to everyone.
Yeah, thanks guys so much. It's for us, I think the podcast is a great place to share thoughts and share perspectives, and it's really turning into a totally, it's not a different thing at all, but we're taking it more and more seriously, and we would like to take it more seriously because we're just I think I'm learning and Josh is learning that it's helpful for people and you guys enjoy it. If it's just entertaining for you guys, it's also totally okay. Like if it's helpful, that's like way extra, right? And we do this I don't clock in for anything. Like Josh doesn't clock in for anything. It's just our time. And yeah, it's a great way for us to be connected. And, you guys can support us in this way. But uh, obviously, we don't expect it from anybody, but we appreciate it when we get it. So thanks, you guys, so much.
Yeah, we've got another classroom scheduled for September 13th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Had some hiccups on that one with some people. The last one was amazing. This is the classroom. These classrooms are where we do a live session with all our patrons who can ask us anything, and they ask us darn good questions. But what's really special about last time is that Will Anglin joined us, and that podcast was incredible. And then he came on and just dropped knowledge and help to so many people. Like I knew Will was. I mean, when I did the podcast with him, I was just blown away. But then seeing him go from that kind of general Will knowledge to kind of coach Will, where people came in and asked about campusing, right? And just Will just zeroing in on amazing recommendations. And so I really wanted to take the time also to say thank you for Will. Just he helped a lot of people, and I got so many messages like, I can't believe I just got told, tips on the hangboard and the tension block by the guy who made it. That was so cool. So just thank you to Will for taking that time. And actually, I think Eric said he would join us for the next one. I might. I got to double check with him, so I might edit that out if
Sheesh.
that doesn't happen. But, yeah, it's always tricky with schedules. Everyone's so freaking busy. But yeah, it's really cool to have those people come on. So yeah, man, that's
Yeah, I
my
want to I want to echo one thing. The classroom guys are like, if you guys are patrons, it's just the cheapest coaching you can get. I really have to reiterate. I think it's cool that we don't have, super, super busy classrooms. And I really don't wish for it to be that way because it's nice to have an intimate space. But I have to reiterate, if you guys want information, you want access to experts breaking down your questions and like really going deep, we're not always going to have Will Anglin there, but I liked Will Anglin. I told my girlfriend right after, I was like, this guy's coached a lot of high level people. Like, this guy's talked to a lot of high level people. And I really obsess about deep diving into climbing theory and mechanics and coaching and whatnot. But, when you have somebody who's been doing that for 10 years longer than I have, or maybe even more than that, like it shows in how they can talk about it. But I work, hard in the moments to try to break things down for you guys. And, Josh is very experienced in rock climbing and can break things down very well and share his perspectives. And it's essentially free coaching from, a lot of different perspectives. And people ask really good questions in this space. It's much more intimate for like that type of conversation. So I can't reiterate this enough. It is a great place to go, and it's a classroom. It's awesome. It's an awesome vibe.
Yeah, I'm blown away by the quality of questions we get. It's they I always say this. I mean, I write back to them. I said, "That is such a good question. I can't wait to tackle that." And yeah, we made. I think I stayed on for 2.5 hours because we had some newer patrons that I really wanted to make sure that they got their questions answered. And so yeah, the classrooms are getting bigger, and I do enjoy that. I don't know if I can really stretch it longer than 2.5 hours, but yeah, come and join us. They're a lot of fun, and thanks for the people who come and bring those great questions. So, all right, Tim, let's get on to the topic. I think we're going to title this topic this podcast very provocatively. We're going to say, "You are training wrong." And you guys, that's kind of clickbait. Clickbait titles, well, they get clicks. And then when you get in here, you know that we're all about nuance. We're all about, I'd say what we're going to do is ask this question: Are we? I'll put in quotes, maybe, or in parentheses, in the U.S. training all wrong? And I'd say this topic kind of started when you were in Japan, or maybe it got brought to my attention more when you went to Japan, and you were a little awestruck that you thought, wow, they do things differently. And that episode was one of our most popular episodes. I think it was called "The Best Gym in the World," and it's all about B pump and your time in Japan. And you maybe randomly said something like, they're doing it all differently. Are we doing it all wrong here? And so I wanted to explore that with you. I wanted to ask this question: uh, Are we training all wrong here? And if we are, how could we be doing it better?
This is such a good topic. To be honest with you guys, like Josh and I have probably mentioned this topic months ago. Like many many months ago. Like we've talked about like training as a whole and like rethinking training already, before this Japanese concept or this Japan climbing concept, this, Japanese culture concept. And that's really where I saw it being used or utilized correctly. But there's still a difference between looking at a culture that does things well and correctly versus rethinking what we are doing, right? So it's kind of two different things. But it's still interesting to look at climbers and like, the biggest question that I think I get asked in like comp climbing or like conversations that even you and I have is why are Japanese climbers so good? Why are they so successful? It's a little bit different than going into how they train. And then when I went to Japan and climbed at B pump, climbed at these gyms, and I was like, okay, so the gyms themselves aren't that different. Like the tools that they are using aren't that different. So it must be how they use their tools. Watching them session, being around them when they session, just observing and like making a lot of assumptions, of course, but like then you kind of, look around and maybe even you can probably just go into their sessions and watch and you're like, okay, a lot of these assumptions are real. Like they literally do just session differently than you. They fall differently than you. They look at their falls differently than you. Like they're doing all these different things with the same tools that you have. So it must be different, right? And so that really got me thinking about, and to be fair, like I think a lot of approaches that I had in training, like growing up, were really good. Like I think they were really, really like closely in line with a lot of those types of things that I'm talking about. But maybe we didn't have such good training tools back in the day, right? Like these gyms were advanced for that time. And a lot of these things that I talk about are like team kid things, to be honest. Like there's not a surprise that team kids are really, really good. And everyone's pointing like these team kids, like snaking me on the wall and stuff. It's like, well, hey, that's probably one small little good thing that they're doing. They're getting more climbing than you. They're more aggressive in that. And like that shows a lot about their personalities, which shows a lot about attributes that makes them good climbers, right? And so instead of dissing people who are better than you, like why don't we look at the little attributes and choices that they make in terms of why they are getting better because of that? And really, so that I'm bringing that up because this topic for me isn't necessarily about the things that you're doing incorrectly. It's more of an approach. It's a mentality and it's overall general approach to the daily things that you do, the frequency at which you do them, and what you pay attention to when it comes to like being critical on yourself. Because it's really important to be humble and look back at what you're doing and being able to change it. That's
I'm,
climbing growth, right?
I'm laughing, Tim, because I wanted to start out this segment by saying things that people are doing incorrectly. Like I was I was gonna I was gonna talk about, um, how do I put this? Actually, I don't want to start off by saying negative things. I want to ask you about this quote that you had for me when we just when we were kind of chatting beforehand, and you said something along the lines of people literally believe that strength is the way, and this is something we harp on, but I just wanted to understand what you meant by they literally believe it, because I think that is just this. It almost sounds like something one might say, but I'm hoping to hear about examples, or what you mean when you've encountered this in your clients before. Sorry, Tim. What do you mean by people literally think that strength is the way?
Yeah, I'll answer that question, in kind of like a roundabout way as I always do, but that's a really interesting thought process, right? Like, okay, people have a reliance. Generically, an assumption or a statement that I made is a lot of people that I run to in climbing have reliances, like period, in terms of what they think gets them to send a climb, to stick a move, to get better. They have a north star, right? And I'm just making an accusation that that North Star is not actually in line with what gets you better at climbing, what sticks a move, like, and so I started to ask myself these questions. What is climbing? First of all, like, what are we actually doing on the climbing wall? How do we actually improve? Is a really big question I've asked myself probably at least a couple times a year for the last 11 years. Why is strength and power training relevant instead of saying that, oh, of course, I just need to get stronger and better at these things, these metrics, these strong climbers must be doing these things and they're super strong in these ways, so I must be doing these things. No. The question is, why are these strengths relevant to the things that I need? That's the question we should be asking, right? Right? Why is this power? Why is this strength relevant to what I need? And that's going to open up a whole nother section of climbing theories that are really important to you. Yeah, yeah.
Dude, Tim, I'm stopping you because that was really, really good what you just said. I'm gonna click. I wish I was listening to this podcast. I could press stop and rewind it 30 seconds. I'll try to kind
And
of summarize some of the things I took out. It
yeah,
was
yeah,
I, so that idea of the North Star that we hold, you instantly made me think, what is it that I hold dear that I think is my key for progressing? And for me, it's typically been try hard, where it's, oh, I just need to try harder, which I'm not. The whole point behind this is to say, don't train or don't do anything. It's about kind of putting it in its place and understanding how it's relevant. And that's the other thing I love that you said is, are we gonna tell you, hey, like doing a hangboard is not useful, and you should never
yeah,
train at
yeah.
all.
Okay,
It's like,
sorry, I'm gonna
go ahead, go ahead.
interrupt you. And like, this is one thing that we always say is like, so does that mean you shouldn't train one arm pull-ups? Does that mean you shouldn't train? It's like, of course you should do those things. But to call those things the reason why you're getting better at climbing, that's the mistake, right? It's like, of course you should do those things. Those are going to help you unlock many different webs of movements and endurance possibilities, efficiency choices. Fine. But to call it that is the mistake. Sorry, I totally interrupted you, but it's kind of what you're saying.
No, I love it, and because I think it's really understanding what our North Star should be, and then also really understanding how to fit those other things into making you a better thing, a b- a better integrating them so that you do achieve that North Star in the right way. And so, I mean, when we were talking about it, you said something along the lines of, okay, let's just take this back to first principles. The fundamental question is, how do we get better at rock climbing? And I'm going to just take a quick stab at this and pass it to you. And you actually then pointed out is, how do you define success at rock climbing? Right. Like, because it's not just how do you get better at rock climbing. To say better, it's like this whole thing we did with Eric, and what makes a climb or a climb the best. So it's, how do you define success at rock climbing? And I really think of this as your ability to figure out the easiest way to do a move and then be able to execute that move. And this, I think of this because it's kind of stopper cruxes, or even if it's a more endurance based thing, it's about knowing how to climb extremely smoothly and efficiently. And so I guess when I thought about that, it made me question my North Star and just thinking about what how do I get better at doing moves the easiest way? And I think that that's one of the things. Actually, uh, I know I've already monologued, but I'm gonna bring in my pro tip because my pro tip, maybe it's not exactly a pro tip, but it was a realization I had when writing this, or when I was doing this prep, and it's the difference between a sport, or maybe the difference between rock climbing and just working out and training, is that in a sport you want to make something as easy as possible. But when we're working out, we often try to make things as hard as possible. We say stiffen up your core for this push up, make it like a plank, a really hard push up versus just what's the easiest way you can do a push up. And so recognizing that we're trying to make things easier, not necessarily get stronger. Now, of course, that's part of leveling up, but just that real focus on making things easy is it was a big breakthrough for me. And yes, that's how that when I really break it down to some first principles, that's where I want to start. And so I'll ask you the fundamental question is, how do we get better at rock climbing? How do you, yeah, take it,
Mm,
Tim.
I love this discussion. I love what you just said. I love everything that you just said. I'm just going to pause for a second so everyone can just, take in what Josh just said. All of that stuff was so like core to a real climber. And like Josh and I've had phone calls about this type of stuff, like when coming to deciding podcast topics. And this podcast topic came from me talking about, us going to climbing gyms and being like, that's not a real climber. That's a real climber. That's a real climber. That's not a real climber. And what's the difference? Like, what's the difference? It's not what they're climbing, it's how they look when they're trying to solve something, right? That's the difference. And the difference truly is, are you looking for the easiest way to do something, right? And performance is different. So I think this is a huge fundamental concept of rock climbing that I run into with a lot of clients. So they just don't understand the difference, or they don't understand that this is part of climbing. They don't understand that climbing is both parts, equally, both parts, theory and performance. I think it's a huge misconception because we're either feeling the climbing, like think about most people's climbing experience. They walk into the gym, right? And they're trying a bunch of shit, falling, sending, falling, sending. And through that process, they are teaching themselves climbing theory, as in, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to put my foot? How am I supposed to grab that thing? How am I supposed to generate? How am I supposed to hold tension? What decision should I make? That's climbing theory, right? All the things to make things easier or to make choices, literally proactive choices to get from point A to point B, maintain positions from point A to point B, and so on, so on. But then they're also performing, right? They're coming off and they're like, oh, but I should have just tried harder, right? In this position. It's like, oh, but I wasn't doing that because I was thinking about the theory and like things behind it. So how do you practice that? You're right. Work out. Working out is a great place to teach you performance. If you just go and pick up a weight as hard as you can, isn't that a great way to teach you how to operate better, right? Because there's a difference between what am I operating with and how do I operate with what I'm operating with better, right? And so performance is just as important as theory. It's actually a huge misconception that I have with youth climbers or professional climbers that I teach. If I teach a really good climber, I just check, are you theory based in your performance, or are you performance based in your performance? Essentially, climbers can negate the process of developing their climbing theory just because they're focused on performance, and vice versa. If you're way too focused on the climbing theory, you will not perform very well. And so what I see in really, really good climbers and really successfully growing climbers is climbers who bounce back between those two things very well, balanced, right? Like going to work out, fine. But when I'm working out, I'm focusing on just this performance aspect. Okay, I'm going to go and moonboard. But on the moonboard, I'm going to use this session with these drills to focus on the theory. I'm just going to break down everything as I go for it because now I'm going to try things that are easy enough where I can break them down, right? Oh, I'm going to try this new style. I'm going to go and spend an hour on this slab on these holds because this is the theory that I don't necessarily know super, super well. And there's certain aspects of the theory. And I want to go really deep into what I think climbing theory is. And something that you said interesting where you're talking about, I think the theory that you go for a lot in your climbing, it's just, I'm going to talk about Josh now, is optimal theory. I think Josh generally climbs in the true optimal. And I've mentioned this before in a separate podcast, or, a lot of my clients have talked about true optimal versus biased optimal. And I do think that the biased optimal is, you know, based on your strengths and based on your understanding of climbing theory, that's what feels the best for you. And a lot of climbers climb in this way, but there is a true optimal, right? I've always kind of pictured this like picture in 50 years when we have a robot who is kind of like can maybe change their body literally in size or in whatever way to look at a climb, an assortment of holds on an angle just those types of holds and this type of angle, the robot will probably be able to tell you what is the perfect build and the perfect level of strength for whatever, the perfect sequence and the perfect amount of timing for everything to make it the easiest, right? To make it the most optimal. And by the way, the easiest way to do a moonboard V10 isn't not powerful. It totally is powerful a lot of the time, right? Like optimal climbing can be powerful. And so that's why it's really interesting not to look at climbing in this way of just technical versus powerfully, which is an early thought that I had in climbing. Like, oh, well, this climb I should do dynamically or powerfully. It's like, well, yeah, that's certain aspects of that to make it optimal, to add power and strength and slower climbing into certain movements to make it optimal. But sometimes optimal is faster or more technical or, whatever it is. And I'm not here to say per climb which one's more optimal. In fact, a literal part of my notes is no one will really know optimal, but the point is to understand the difference between true optimal and biased optimal and constantly teach ourselves in that way. And then we kind of go
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
Well, thanks for saying that. I climb in the the best way. I don't know if that's true, but I've tried to embrace that, and I think that is that idea that we talk about where when you climb with people with different strengths, you start getting exposed to the different ways to do things. And I will literally ask myself, I'll be on a certain angle that I know a certain friend would excel at with certain types of holds. I'll ask myself, what would he or she do? What would they do? And try to put my mind into that line of thinking instead of saying, well, I know I want to do, I want to see if I can skip those bad holds and jump. And, it's something that I've come around to as you talked about performance and theory. And yeah, I used to lean more and more on that try hard, that I'm going to try as hard as I can. And I'm not going to say that I never paid attention to climbing and movement. But as I've gotten older, I've just recognized how important that is and that ability to oscillate between, okay, what should I do here? And then doing it and trying really hard is an interesting uh like idea of how to think about climbing as a whole. I really like that. And I guess
Can,
my go ahead.
yeah. Can I correct something that I said? Because I was, what I was saying about you was not necessarily that you always climb in the true optimal. And this may have been not necessarily what I was trying to say is that you look for the true optimal. Like you are constantly looking, like, okay, you'll try something and you'll probably be climbing that in your biased optimal because you don't necessarily know what true optimal is, but you're always looking to define it, right? Even if you've just done a boulder, you'll probably be like, was that the best way I could have done that boulder? And if you cannot have done that, if you didn't do it or you can't do it, you usually, I'll watch you probably mutate yourself in order to do it through training or through sequential changes, right? And that's what I think really good rock climbers do is they have an understanding of what true optimal might be and where it might come from. Maybe aren't able to do it per se, but try to get themselves to do it through training or through certain things. And that's just a general concept that I think is good for good climbers. And that's why I was pointing to you for it.
Yeah, I will do this with easier climbs, quote unquote easier climbs where I'll do them and I'll just do something that I made it work, and I just think to myself, I'll even say, "That is not the right way to do that." You do not do that V5 like I just did it, and, I I will sometimes reclimb it, and I think we were talking about that. Remember I did some move on the moon board. I can't remember where we brought this up. It was in a classroom or anyways, I did a move on moon board, and I just after doing it, I mean, I flashed it and I thought to myself, wow, I really should have locked that off instead of doing it the way I did with a straight arm. And I did it and I locked it off and I thought to myself, yeah, better like that. Maybe not as easy for me. Like there's a reason why in that
Mm.
moment I chose to go. Tim's like,
What you
that's
just said,
important. Yeah.
what you just said, where you said that may have not just, that may have been not easy for me, AKA biased optimal, but you are actually acknowledging that it is better, right? And that's the difference between I just had a hard, it was hard for me to describe what the difference of bias optimal versus true optimal is. And when you say that specifically, like, oh, I should have done this, but it didn't feel as good.
Well, so let's link this to what we're talking about. This is where strength should not be your North Star because right there, I did the move. And if I hadn't done the move And what I told myself was, oh, you must need to be stronger on that hold. Then you just narrowed your world of possibilities, the infinite
Mm.
layers that we talk about peeling and sequencing, uh, to something that's totally separate. It's just, oh, I should have had stronger fingers. Oh, I should do more freaking barbell rows. It's just no, like no, no, no. Like that is not the answer. And it just it's I'm not saying I don't do all that stuff, but I like that example now that you brought it up. It's I had I luckily have enough awareness to see that there are other ways to move through each individual move. And as you get better, you might be able to pick out which one is quote unquote more efficient or easier when you're standing there, and then you build an intuition when doing them, which way is better. But even just understanding that there's a myriad of ways to do that single move, and then even within that, you can break it down a million ways, and that's kind of what we did in our sequencing, or what we call it conquering cruxes,
Right.
where you can really peel back the layers again and again. But that's that first mindset is, where do you go to? When something goes wrong, what's your first thought? Uh, and if it's defeatist, like I like something that you've said before, where if someone says they can't do something, you don't want to hear that. You want to say, "Prove it to me. Prove it to me."
Hmm.
And
Prove
and
you
so,
can't do something. That was a
yeah,
coach thing.
yeah,
Someone coached me and said that.
I I love that because it forces you to take off your hat of, oh, I just need to get stronger fingers or whatever the case may be, and just sit there and said, okay, can I really prove it to not just you, Tim, but to myself that I really can't do this move? And, there's going to be times where you really do move well. You really do have the good beta. You really do feel good. And maybe you need to get stronger. We're never going to tell you you don't want to get stronger, because I will always tell you, you never have too strong fingers. Uh, but it's just like, you have to find that out yourself. And I just want to make sure that I love the idea of that North Star, like, and
Hmm.
yeah. Anyways, okay, I
I
like
want to
that,
share
Tim.
one other thing that you kind of just mentioned about clients, and I I've run into a lot of clients that have like, you know, core issues in stunting their own ability to learn and their growth in climbing. And a lot of it comes from this, the word that we were just using called reliances. And their North Stars do typically lie in the metric realm where they think that their literal reliance or correlation in growth in climbing comes from this like training world. And that's a lot of people. Like, don't think that I'm talking about someone specific, but that's a lot of people. And a lot of you are probably like, that's me. If that's you, then this is kind of what we're trying to pick apart right now. And we are still, by the way, climbing. We're just talking about climbing theory, right? There's so many different attributes when it comes to improving in climbing, but theory is probably the most important one because we always are saying, of course, you have to get stronger. Of course, you have to have more fitness. Of course, you have to have different things. And I do want to go into those things, but theory is probably the most important thing. And I love how Josh was just talking about it because it's basically how you answer questions, right? If your answer to questions comes from this standpoint of strength, and that means you rely on strength, right? And so, what does that mean? In how do you answer questions better? Well, think about kids. Kids, when I started rock climbing, I was 4'11", 70 pounds, and I couldn't do a pull up. I couldn't do a push up either. Like, I couldn't really do real push ups. And so, I had very little strength. So, when I went onto the climbing wall, and of course, my goal was still the same as any of your goals were, start at the same hold and finish on this tape, like just like anybody started in any climbing gym, like these are my holds. I have to follow these colors and I have to go to the top. Okay, so my question was always, how do I do that? And you and I have the same questions. How do I do that? But the ability for me to answer those questions couldn't come from strength. So that's why kids can teach themselves better. And we had this conversation in the classroom where if you come into the sport with a lot of strength, be careful. Not like don't use that strength, but be really careful. You're going to answer those questions incorrectly. You're probably going to, right? And so you have to be really cognizant of that. And that just means like, even if you're climbing V7, even if you're climbing V5 or V9 or V10, still you should be thinking about how you're answering those questions. How do I stick this hold? How do I stay on this foot longer? How do I reach this? How do I go for this? And if you're going to answer that question from one narrow-minded point of view, which is strength or finger strength or pulling ability, then you are not looking at the big picture, right? So I brought up most people's climbing experience, right? They go find climbing theory by trial and error or just by happenstance running into people who are better than you. And and can share that experience. And you're assuming that their ability to communicate plus your ability to understand what they're trying to communicate is your way of learning and growing, right? And that's how most people can learn climbing theory. This assumes you can learn climbing, period. This assumes that you can learn climbing and teach yourself through other people's information or through your own information of trial and error. Now, most people do get really good like that. That's how most people got good at climbing. But is that to say the best way to get good at climbing? Even if that is the best way to get good at climbing, that means you have to improve your ability to talk to people. You have to improve your ability of deconstructing information that you have received and seeing where that information is actually relevant. Because plenty of people are going to tell you in the climbing gym, like, oh, well, you fell on that move because of this. And what I did was this. I'm sure every single one of you have heard this in some way, and they're not telling you what you're doing incorrectly. They're not using theory, and then not necessarily, well, they might be. If it's like an actual certified coach or an actual good climbing coach or a professional rock climber telling you those things, maybe they do have an understanding of theory that you're missing, but they're not trying to give you that, that experience from that point of view, right? They're still
I'm
answering the question the same
I'm
way.
grinning like an idiot over here because I just have these memories of seeing tip, eh, just a guy trying to pick up on a girl and giving her beta, and you see it and you just think, oh, that's just terrible beta. Like, do not listen to that. Yeah. So
And another point on that, some people give beta, and beta isn't the reason why this person's not doing the movement. It's operation of the beta that they're doing. Or sometimes it
yeah,
is
yeah.
beta. And that's why it's so hard to like, you can even see success in some ways, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing the right thing, right? It's so crazy how much theory is involved.
Yeah, so when I thought about this idea of, okay, I want to get better at climbing, so I want to figure out the easiest way to do moves and be able to execute those moves. And so it just made me think, okay, how do we solve movement better? Right? Like, how do I figure it out better? And that's some of this sequencing, figuring out all these layers. And I would say that's our last podcast you and me did, Tim, number 60. And then you think about executing on the movement and its effort, coordination, focus, using what you have, right? This is again like this North Star of theory and then performance on that theory. And it just, what really comes down to is what you were saying. It's all of this stuff we do our best to deconstruct individual moves or help you all figure out how to deconstruct individual moves. Every move is different, every body is different, and it really comes down to, if you want to have continued success and get better and better, you have to learn how to learn. And that's what you were hinting at, Tim, with bumping into people, asking people, and this is what Will Anglin said on the podcast around, I want to coach you as few times as possible. And I guess I don't know if we have, this idea of learning how to learn, this meta learning. This is something we're always taking a stab at, and trying to help people with. And I don't know if it's completely articulated by anyone at any point. We're still figuring it all out, because no one knows the best way to take you from a V0 to a V17. I'll tell you what, one thing we can tell you is drop strength reliance in your mindset. You are not going to find your way to the top by thinking that literally, and I've used the term literally, strength is going to be the thing that gets you there. I'm not going to say that you don't need to get stronger, but if that's your North Star, you're in trouble from the start.
Yeah, I want to take that into something that you had said previously, which is the definition of how you define success in rock climbing and what you define as successful rock climbing or success in your rock climbing day is super important, right? And that kind of goes into why we keep saying and debunking strength as like your North Star, because that's what you're calling success now, right? You're saying and calling success in rock climbing you being able to get stronger, which have zero, they have some correlation, but that's really not. And so I'm going to try to tackle what I think success in rock climbing looks like. And I'll tell you where, these thoughts were formed over time. First thought was formed by watching Chris Sharma climb. And so, as a kid, I was able to watch somebody climb like the world's first 515 and it came out on a movie and, on YouTube and stuff. And I was watching this and I was like, wow, well, there's very specific choices this guy's making. There's a very specific build that I'm watching and there's very specific just climbing choices and theory and like strengths that I notice, right? So obviously as a kid, I was just, and Adamandra, like La Dura Dura came out, like that film on YouTube where Chris Sharma and Adamandra were going head to head on La Dura Dura, the hardest climb in the world at the time, came out my first year climbing. And so I was able to watch like them just go at it on these like V15 boulders on this route and try to send this 515C. It happened live in my earliest climbing journey. And so everything that I sculpted around was Chris Sharma and Adamandra. And in my opinion, they're some of the best rock climbers of all time for solely for the reasons of their attributes as climbers. And so I wrote some things that I think are what is the ideal climbing build? Had this conversation before with Josh. I've written notes on what I think the perfect climber looks like and what kind of attributes. It comes from a strength realm, a technical realm, and a mental realm. This is just the thing that I'll say right now is it comes from all three of those things. And I just kind of wrote that Chris Sharma is generally very powerful. He's really precise with his movements and his choices. He's really efficient. All of his choices lead to a lot of efficiency. They may be intuitive, right? A lot of those things are probably intuitive, so he's not necessarily correcting all of his climbing. That's also a huge aspect. That's another aspect, is literally making those things intuitive. And his mental game is really strong. Fine. Adamandra has all of those things, and I think he has perfect climbing theory. I think his understanding of how movements should be done the best way, exactly what Josh was saying with, I'm teaching myself always how to do movements the easiest way. Well, I think Adamandra has perfected that almost. And I think his understanding of climbing theory is probably the best out there, period. And he also has the perfect physical build to match his climbing theory, in my opinion. Maybe he could have maybe more power. Maybe he could have like stronger core. Like, of course, these things can grow, but in his understanding of climbing theory, it seems like if he wants to perform a climbing movement, his body can do it. If he thinks the climbing movement should be done a certain way, his body can probably do it, right? And that's where strength is really relevant. And he has a strong mental game that's willing to fight and be creative. His coordination's solid, his finger strength is solid, and he's incredible endurance in all capacities. These are all things that I think are very proper for climbing. I just saw a thing that Lattice posted, by the way, of some comp climbing thing, and it said Lattice cast. Like the caption said, like, do you know about cast? And I was like, whoa, interesting. Like there's this kind of word that they use, the capitalized CAST. And what they wrote was, these are things that are important for this climber. I'm not going to say that's what their philosophy in climbing strength building is, but they wrote coordination, accuracy, strength, and tension. And I was like, oh, fascinating. Super interesting. Like, good pyramid, good, base for all of the attributes you should be working on as a climber. But there's probably more than that, is kind of what I thought. And, I translated all of that thought into what I think I look at when I'm, developing and climbing. And theory was number one. Theory was number one. Exactly what we just spent 30 minutes talking about. Like the relationship of holds, the choices that we make, literally the reliance of where I sprout, what I'm looking at in terms of success. Like, okay, I can't do this, but what does success look like and how do I get there, right? Theory is super important. General strengths I find very important, right? So when I'm talking about Chris Sharma and Adamandra, I think the overall, if you tested them in metrics, and people have gotten obsessed over time with this stuff, right? Like the 9A strength assessment, like the Beast Fingers competition is a competition where you go and you do like 10 strength metrics. Some are related to climbing and some kind of are. You literally bench press in some of these things. Based on that, you qualify for the final, which is a climbing final. But people are clearly obsessed with general strength, and general strengths do apply to climbing, right? Theory-related strengths, like I said, like excessive power, excessive generation of power on specific types of holds, very important. Wide and narrow tension, really close tension, really wide tension in your shoulders and your core, lower body tension, varieties of finger strengths, different types of contact strength, fast twitch strength. These are all theory-related strengths. And training, I also wrote a note that training can unlock new training. It's a huge part of high-level climbing is once you're able to do like certain types of pull-ups, then you can do muscle-ups, then you can do archer pull-ups, you can do typewriters, you can do different types of weighted pull-ups, you can do one-arm pull-ups. All these different types of training can unlock new movements. Mental game was the very last note that I made here. And I think it's actually, I'm learning at this point in my climbing, it's the most important part of my development. It's not the theory anymore. It's not about the strength anymore. It's also why another misconception that you see a lot of strong climbers nowadays, probably they don't train as much as they used to. They don't do a lot of strength things that they used to. Why? Because it's not necessarily, well, we kind of just debunked this whole thing. Strength isn't the North Star ever, right? But once we've gotten to a certain place where we have a base of our build, then our build allows us to do certain things. Well, now no longer do I care about those things. I mostly care about in my climbing personally today is my mental game and my theory. What do I mean by mental game? Climbing can be scary. It can be painful, uncomfortable in many ways. And if we ever allow this idea to get in the way of our choices, then we have a problem. Decision making in climbing should come from theory first. All adaptations and deviations to movement should come from a mechanics and position oriented standpoint. And that's why all of this stuff is super important to define these things really well, because whether you like it or not, when it comes to performance, we make deviations and adaptations. And most of those deviations come from reactions, which come from a negative mental thought, which comes from a weak mental game. And that's why I put a lot of things. So,
That last
nice.
thing you said around positions coming first, I think that is the big thing for me to really, when I really unpack where we may be training wrong, is I think this obsession with strength metrics is as which is wholly divorced from positions while climbing. And Adam Ondra, yeah. So I made that comment. What would my friend X do on this? You can ask yourself, what would Adam do? What would Adam Ondra do on this? And I encourage you to look around at the different types of holds. The Chris Sharma might choose to dyno from this hold to this hold. Almondra might choose to do an entirely different way. And just understanding that the first line of thinking is positions versus strength. And it's interesting because you also brought up fear and just that mental ability of embracing what you know the positions to be, and that's something that you see with really top level climbers. And Alamandra, just he seems to always choose do his best to climb in that optimal way that he knows he should, regardless of if he's skipped a few clips, regardless if he's got the rope around his leg. He just really embraces. I always stay away from this idea, this perfect technique, but he really leans into that, and that is this. I don't. I'm going to say that is this quote unquote technical climber, and I hate when people say, "Oh, this climb is technical and this climb is dynamic or powerful," and you made that distinction, or no, you said that's not appropriate distinction. I kind of want to echo that, where how you move on the wall and finding that optimal way, whether it's dynamic, quote unquote, thuggy or delicate, that's all technical. Like there's no, it's not that
Mhm.
one climb is because it's slabby, it's technical. And because it's a roof, it's thuggy. It's like, what are you talking about? Like these are all, we're all the type of thought process and technique you put into action there is technique, and it is finding the optimal way. And I just really want to double down on that position first, strength. I don't know. I'm not going to say strength, strength not first. And I'm not so psyched
Yeah.
on these beast finger things and seeing little kids doing pulls from the ground with tension blocks with 100 pounds. And we even talked about how strength training could literally be detrimental, because this whole idea is, are we thinking about training wrong? And I'm just going to say flat out, if you're listening, and I'm going to be really serious about this, like not joking, if you're listening and you climb V4, understand that the key to climbing V5 is not going to be found in doing like pulls from the ground on a tension block. Like I'm not, I want to laugh and joke about that, but it's actually really serious. I think you will do yourself harm if you think that you need to do more curls. I'm not saying that you can't do pull-ups and you can't do hangboard. I'm just saying that if that's how you think you're going to break through into higher grades, you really need to change your mindset, because until if you told me you've been climbing your whole life and you climb V14 and then you do strength metrics and you find out that your three finger drag is really weak, okay, like let's
Which
talk about
happens a lot, by the
which
way.
happens. But it's
Yeah,
not
that's
like, but if that's your go-to at V4, let's have a different conversation. It's important.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think, I kinda wanna tackle why I think climbers, go heavily into that thought, like, why climbers generally will, like the obvious things is it's what's in media. The obvious answer to why climbers generally rely on strength is because, it's easily perceived as the reason why good climbers are successful, right? It's easily perceived as that, and it is a misconception, right? A lot of climbers don't even spend that much time in the strength realm to get good at climbing, but a lot of climbers do, right? So that's why it's also really hard to see the difference. And it's also an interesting that you were just bringing up style is really important. Like the technique and things, those are choices that climbers make. And so when you watch a really, really strong set of 10 different rock climbers climb the same V12 boulder, yeah, they all look different. They're all making different choices and have different reliances, but they're all involved in proactive thought to send the rock climb, right? And so I'll never say which one is better or worse. I'll just say which one's better or worse for them, right? It's just dependent on what their reliances are, right? But none of them probably rely on strength as or finger strength or whatever to in order to solve certain things. So I want to backtrack quite a bit and kind of answer like what is climbing, because that's essentially how I'm kind of pointing out why people pick certain things, like why people point to, well, I'm not strong enough to do this move, right? It's the common thing I hear. I'm not strong enough to reach that. It's like, well, that first of all is a terrible fundamental thought, because you're assuming and telling me straight up that you're using your feet properly and you're using timing and momentum properly, right? So those are factors at play. But what I mean by that is there's three thoughts that I find in climbing really, really important, right? How to get from point A to point B. Sometimes that's distance, right? It's sometimes, well, sorry, sometimes it's powerful, sometimes it's momentum based, sometimes it's footwork based. It's mostly always footwork based. How to get from point A to point B is a part of rock climbing. How to hold point A to point B, right? Because sometimes it's really easy to hold on a vert angle on jugs with jug feet. That is very irrelevant. Easy climbing, positions are irrelevant, right? That's positions. Holding point A to point B and then to point C and holding that and moving your feet and holding those points. That's all positions, right? That's the importance of what Josh is talking about is also very present in hard climbing. It's actually way more present in hard climbing than it is in easy climbing, right? It becomes very important, right?
Hold on,
So that distance creation.
remember David Fitzgerald saying that he
Yeah, yeah.
trains by finding positions. He starts out
And
his
holding them.
training by holding hard positions and then builds the boulder around that. So he then finds the point A to point B versus starting
Right.
there, which I thought fascinating. It shows you
Totally.
that says a
And
lot
I
about
think that's
his
just
ability.
one attribute of what rock climbing is, right?
Of
But of
course,
course, it's the distance creation. Getting from point A to point B is also one aspect of it. And then, the second would be positions. And the last thing would be efficiency, right? Is okay, once you have been able to make all of these choices, can you clean them up? Can you waste less energy? Can you make less movements to make them more efficient, right? I literally think that's what rock climbing is how to get from point A to point B the best way, whether that's through power, whether that's through foot choices, whether that's through operation of the choices that you make, how to hold those positions. Because sometimes when you add too much to something, it's going to be hard to hold. Actually, very often when you add too much to something, it's going to be hard to hold. If you overdo a powerful movement, that foot's not going to stay as well, right? If you add another foothold, other foothold might be hard to use, for example, right? If you do this drop knee, you might not be able to get the distance, but you can hold the position, right? There's so many back and forths. I find myself going constantly back and forth in climbing when I'm like, I need more of this, but I need less of this because I need to hold the position, right? Or I need to hold the position a lot, but I'm just not getting enough height. So what do I need to add? Something to get that first thing. Okay, once I've done all of that, I literally don't have enough power endurance to be able to send this boulder. So once I've made all these choices and I see what I can do, I have to correct it, right? That's literally what I see as climbing. And basically, my understanding is that people heavily rely on one of these three realms at any given time in their climbing experience, whether they're projecting something, trying a new climb, or literally just sequencing something. They heavily rely or heavily, stay in one of these for way too long. I need to create distance. Oh, like what's the best way I can create distance? First of all, your ideas for what creatively you can do to get from point A to point B are terrible. That's going to be one big assumption I make. Second of all, that's where strength is the biggest reliance. And that's where people turn into their North Stars. Well, in order to get from point A to point B and it's really far, of course I need power. It's like, well, that's also a horrendous thought. We just went into an entire podcast about why that's a bad way to answer that question. And positions, again, the exact same thing. You just aren't creative enough. You just aren't strong enough mentally to believe that you're capable of certain things, period. That's going to be, I'm going to save a lot of money for a lot of you guys in getting coaching. That's what coaches are going to tell you. They're going to prove it to you in a lot of different ways. They're going to put you in positions and tell you straight up, you are not doing it. They're just showing you what you're already not doing, right? But I'll tell you straight up what you're not doing. You're blaming the wrong things in order to create distance. Then you're not trying enough things. And then you're blaming the wrong things and not trying enough things when it comes to position. And then you're blaming it too many things and not trying enough things for efficiency. You're not creative enough. Kids are more creative than you. They have a better way of answering those questions because they are not strong enough to do certain things. That's also why, Josh, I agree with you. I hate watching kids train. I hate watching kids able to do one arm pull ups on 10 millimeters. I hate watching kids being able to do like absurd amounts of muscle ups because that turns them into bad climbers because it turns them into a reliance. Why Al made a really big thing in saying power and strength is a distraction. He's not saying it's bad. He's saying it's a distraction. What is it a distraction from? Understanding how to create distance in climbing, understanding how to create positions in climbing and hold positions, and understanding how to be efficient. That's truly what we're talking about on this podcast is how to do those things better
I'm
for
I'm
better
still
climbing.
I'm just still laughing because that funny voice you made about the power guy. Yeah, I remember when Al said something along the lines of, "How about I throw a pinch at you? Does it matter how strong you are, or does it matter about where you catch it and the timing of how you catch it?" I thought that was really interesting. That really stuck with me. And boy, has he made a lot of amazing climbers. We got to get him back on here at some point. He's just had success after success after success with his athletes.
Totally. Yeah, and a lot of those climbers, by the way, like, and this is where the devil's advocate, like, but what about when they need to do a powerful move? It's like, you're right. Of course, totally. Like, they do need to train strength and power eventually. But to start them off with this, like, entre concept, doing things perfectly and understanding that first, and then adding strength, it will not be a
So
distraction.
I want to tackle that because I made a
Mm,
really I got real serious instead of making fun of people with that idea around going from V4 to V5. But now I'm gonna half make fun of people, but see if let us know if you feel called out, if you feel seen and you don't like it. Me and Tim we're gonna leave these names anonymous, but you look it on Instagram, you see someone and their profile is tons of reels of them training front levers, training one arm hangs, doing one arm pull-ups, all the things, pulling from blocks from the floor. And then you see one post out of the last 10 of them in the gym, and they're climbing like V7 and they're jacked. You look at this and you just think, wow, look at this person. They're in the gym, putting in the work, doing the one arms, sweating, hashtag training, and then they go out and they're climbing V7. And dude, this is a half a joke, but like, it's almost like sometimes you don't know what you're like, and you have to have these kind of cues. Like I used to say this. How do you know you're weak at crimps? Because you freaking love compression. Not necessarily because you go, oh, I'm weak at crimps, but sometimes you just don't realize what you're bad at, and sometimes you need these hints that, oh wait, maybe this is me. So go look at your Instagram, go look in the mirror. Are you jacked? Can you do a one arm pull up and you can't? And you're struggling, and your long term project is a V7? Like that's that's not to be expected. If you were to rewind 15 years, uh, you know, and you were climbing, you could climb V7 and just look normal, and someone who looked like that and had those metrics would be a V12 climber. And, I want to show this person their Instagram and say, do you think that if you make another 100 posts and you do another 300 sessions on, the Beast Maker or the Tension Campus rungs, that you're going to be climbing V15, or are you going to be climbing V7 plus, V8? Like where's your marginal gains coming from? And uh yeah, it's just it cracks me up because it's literally it's visible. You see these people and you're just like, wow, you look amazing. You look jacked. And then you see them perform or or climb and they can't do it. And it actually makes me think of, all right, I don't know if I've told you this before, but I have mentioned that I did Ninja Warrior, and this was a long time ago. I did it with my buddy Ben Sneed. So we did well, and we went to Las Vegas, and we did like the finals, and we went to this pool party, and they did some pool party thing, uh, and we literally played this game where you look around and you look at all the people and you say, bodybuilder or athlete, right? You look at the contestants, you say bodybuilder or athlete. And and dude, I mean, the bodybuilders, you can kind of tell
yeah,
they
you
don't
can tell.
they don't look right. And then they get on the course and they suck. And,
And they're not coordinated.
they're not
Yeah.
coordinated. And, that was actually one of our impetuses for trying out for the show is me and Ben were like, dude, all these people think they're athletes. You meet so many people
Mm,
in the gym and, they squat heavy or whatever. They, you know, do great lat pull downs and they think that they're athletes, but they're not athletes.
mhm,
They're, I don't know, whatever. You can call them bodybuilders. It doesn't matter. And it goes back to that, my quote unquote pro tip in the beginning where I said sports are about trying to do things
mm,
easier. You try to do the hardest things easy so that you can do even harder things in the easiest way, which sounds kind of ridiculous. And let's face it, climbing kind of is. But y- you know, it's a really good guiding principle. And I'll never forget that game we played, bodybuilder or athlete. And I don't blame you if you get sucked into wanting to look a
of
certain way, or
course.
if you want to do the one arm pull up. And this is the last thing I'll say is you mentioned
Mm,
why do people get sucked into this, and strength metrics are attractive because they're simple. I hung more this week, or sometimes they can look really showy and cool. You can do a one arm pull up, but I can't tell you how many times people come up to me and ask me, "Hey Josh, how do you do a one arm pull up? Like, what do you do? Where are you training?" And my training was typically after my session, I would do 10 perfect pull ups, quote unquote, what I call perfect pull ups. Josh, what are you doing back here? Where's your one arm pull up come from? I'm like, I just came back here. I'm going to do 10 one arm or 10 normal pull ups, two arm pull ups. They're like, Josh, I can do 25. Why can't I do a one arm pull up? And I guess what I'm trying to tell everyone, like the moral of the story here is play the long game. Play the long game. Because if you get good at climbing at our sport, that strength will come. And the one thing we should end this with is when is it okay to do strength training? What does that look like? But play that long game because it will work out. You will be able to do a one arm pull up. So Tim's nodding his head. I
damn it,
talked about
Josh. I can't stop
Ninja
nodding my
Warrior.
head.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
I can't
Well,
stop nodding my head, dude. Play the long game and be an actual athlete and stop trying to be a climbing bodybuilder. That's what I got out of your little monologue right
climbing
there. Like,
bodybuilder. Oh, dude,
stop
that's so good.
stop trying to be a fucking climbing bodybuilder. This shit pisses me off. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, I hate swearing on the podcast, but this is the type of stuff that's gonna make me swear. Like, like climbing body. Oh, it's like it's totally a real thing, man. Like, you see those bodybuilders all the time, and yeah, like they're super impressive to look at, right? Like, but that's all they're going for. They don't really probably care that much about their ability to perform movements and stuff. That's not what they're going for, right? So stop being like that in climbing, right? Like, let's stop trying to be able to do hangboard things. Let's stop trying to do body tricks. Let's stop. Well, if you want to do those things, also, I gotta say, as a young climber who was like really impressed by those things, I also did those things. Like, I also did those things, but I also was getting better at climbing. There's two different things. I knew that those are two different things. If I want to do a muscle up, I knew that it probably wasn't going to apply to my climbing. Now I found out that it did, and I learned how to use it in being intentional in my climbing and feeling those muscles work. Like, I really do think that the reason why you were able to do one arm pull ups is throughout those perfect pull ups, you just engaged the muscles. You thought about the muscles that were being engaged and you did that on the wall. So it's more about using the muscles that you actually had. And then you were like, oh, well, one arm pull ups are just using these muscles way, way, way harder. And you also learn how to try really hard. So you had the muscles and you learn how to try really hard. That's a one arm pull up, right? Simple as that. It really is as simple as that. I also did not train one arm pull ups, and I was one day able to do like two, three, or four. And I was like, what the hell's going on? Like, I'm just doing a bunch of regular pull ups, a bunch of them, like a lot of them. Every time I did weighted pull ups or regular pull ups, I just thought about the muscles that were being engaged and I just felt it. I was, oh, like really trying to feel the pain, discomfort, and like not bad pain, but like the strain of my muscles being fired and shaking and like really feeling all that stuff, because that's what it feels like when you're doing a one arm pull up. It doesn't feel easy. It feels really, really hard. It feels like I'm trying super, 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 super hard, but I'm capable of doing it. I'm learning that my body's capable of doing it. And I'm teaching myself how to try really hard. Oh, I love it. I loved all of it.
Well,
So,
so
so,
let's,
oh, so good.
well,
Oh, I have a pro tip. Forgot.
okay, go ahead.
Oh, did you want to?
Okay, well, yeah, let me, I just I want to touch on where we're saying all these negative things about training and strength training. I don't want to say that you never should train. I want to separate that hashtag training. I love the term climbing bodybuilder, and look, they're probably not even listening to us here if you're really like that. But the thing is that it can be a little insidious, and you can get sucked into that world without meaning to. So just check yourself, make sure that you're not all of a sudden getting obsessed with metrics that don't matter. Um, I want to separate training also from like rehab or prehab, and doing some gentle reps on the hangboard to expose your tissue to hangboarding is different. So if you are a V4 climber and you're like, yeah, I want to do hangboard because it makes my fingers feel safer. It lets me expose myself to new stresses in a safe way. Great, but don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But if you're spending 30% of your climbing workout on the hangboard instead of 3%, you're off track there. And it's this thing. Don't get fooled by your training, right? So you will see your numbers go up, and you will see progress on the wall. You will go from V4 to V5. You will go, like that guy we joked about. You will go from V7 to V8 after another year of that. But that doesn't mean that that's the good North Star to have. And that's where it's really tricky is you will see gains from it, but you just don't want to get sucked into it. You don't want to get fooled by it. You want to recognize that it's completely separate from climbing and it supports your climbing. And I mean, we've talked about how do you actually even need to do quote unquote hashtag training? And I'm not saying you shouldn't, but we definitely have seen plenty of climbers be some of the best in the world without ever doing what you would think of as training. And so the last thing I think is important to do is talk a little bit about how I do train, or so it's like we say all these things about not training, and actually I've started to do more training, but it's kind of in these two ways. Is I need to maintain my strength. I kind of know where it's been before, and sometimes I don't have the ability to do that volume on the wall due to time constraints, and just I don't get to climb as much at as high an intensity for a myriad of reasons, regardless of even my age. So just sometimes you have to make sure that you are exposing yourself to high intensity, just to keep that strength around. And then the other thing I do is to tie that into this climbing theory is, you think, okay, I'm doing this move well, and I'm doing it just like my buddy is doing it, but man, my fingers feel weak on this move. And so using training to really plug an obvious weakness and saying, I am fairly certain that I did most of what I need to do to get myself set up for success in this movement in a movement based way, but I'm still struggling, or maybe even also it feels dangerous and risky on my tissues. Okay, let's talk about how you can take this off the wall and make it better. But
This stuff is so good.
well,
This stuff
good,
is
because
so good.
that's a good way to kind of wrap up, because it's even I have doubts about how well this training will work, because
Mm.
anytime you take things out of context, fingerboarding, hanging on a fingerboard instead of your crux hold on your project, you lose some level of applicability. And that doesn't mean that it's not like, it doesn't mean there's no crossover, but recognize that the best crossover to your crux move is doing the crux move. And now you can see people set simulators indoors and they're a little different. And then they often go and have success on the boulder itself. And that's not because it's a perfect replica, it's because it's similar. And so as you start going down this chain, you lose applicability. And that's why I will always say, you're never going to squat your way to V14, and you're never going to hangboard your way to V16. And the thing that's really interesting there is that, and where the nuance comes and where you have to figure out your own ways, is that those things may have benefit for you, but also every move is freaking different, and we can't mimic every move in training. So you have to get out there and climb, but then you need to build up your base strength. I think, both through climbing and supporting any kind of glaring weaknesses. And this is why it's so tricky, you guys. This is why I'm going to echo what Will
Mhm.
said. Climbing is hard, and it takes a long time to get good at it. And finding how to utilize strength in the best way while keeping your North Star being movement is a forever endeavor. And I struggle with it. Forever endeavor. I just shout out Eric's climb.
Eric's climb.
Yeah, and I still struggle with it. So yeah,
Same here.
hopefully that's those are all the things I really have to share on it. And
Nice.
yeah, I hope it helps. Man,
I don't want to echo too much what you just said because I think you said it really well. But essentially, what you just did was to describe the framework of training for climbing. You just described the framework of like when you start implementing things, why you maintain things, and why you grow in certain things, right? And then what you should look out for, right? You just used kind of what we just described as like the framework for reliance in that language of when I should train for things. And if I am falling on something, what I should look at first. I think that was beautifully said. And that is where, and also what you just said, it's a forever endeavor. And for us, it's really hard still too, and that should be a good understanding for you guys that this stuff is not understood very well. Any research that you see out there, be skeptical. Anything that you see that's out there for climbing media, be skeptical. Be curious as to why those things are said and try it out yourself, but be skeptical because we don't actually like there's no climber out there right now who can explain to you the best way to get better. It's not there. I'm trying to do that all the time with my coaching, with this podcast. I'm trying really hard. I'm trying to find it out for myself, but there's no answers out there, right? But what we are trying to do is figure out, what I do understand about training is that there's certain times and frequencies for certain types of people based on how much time and access you have to the gym and how much you're actually doing and what you want to grow and what you think is important to grow for specific people is going to be different. And that's also why I hate making training plans. Stop asking me for them. Stop asking people for training plans. Make them yourself. And the reason why I say that is because it should be dependent on you for the exact reasons that Josh just said. You're going to know what you need a lot better.
So
Yeah, or are you going to?
yeah, it's just I really want to emphasize this idea that it's not figured out. And I'm going to tie it back into what Dave McLeod said, and that idea around what is important is focus, concentration, and that this showing up, and that's that learning how to learn and focusing on learning, seeing what went wrong, figuring it out. And so I would argue that I would argue, Tim, that we do know. I don't know if this is the best way to get better at climbing, but here's what I'll say is you gotta go climb a lot and you gotta pay attention and you gotta try to put effort into getting better the next time you pull on the wall each and every time. And if you're gonna try hard. So yeah, I mean, this is where like that's why I don't want to say I'm anti-training, but we don't know what all works. What we do know is if you go climb a lot and really try hard and pay attention, that
You're going to get
seems to
better at
have worked.
climbing.
That's you're going to get better at climbing, and that's Dave Graham, that's Chris Shummer, that's your
Yeah.
heroes. And how does training fit into that? Somewhere, somewhere.
Well, I'll say if you think that your climbing theory can be stretched and you think that more moves are possible and you need to catch your body up to do those climbing movements, that's where training is relevant. Training essentially is putting your body through repetitive abuse at certain intervals, whether it's how much time you're doing that for, how many reps you're doing, and how much intensity you're doing it for. There is a formula that works for most people to get better and get stronger for sure in training, and you just have to find out those numbers. Not going to be the same for everybody. None of those numbers are going to be the same for anybody, right? Like everyone's going to do different weights. Everyone's going to do different activities. Everyone's going to do different rep intervals. Everyone's going to find a different level. And everyone's mental thresholds are different, right? So what you think is my max and what I think is my max is going to be different. And that has to be pushed and tested. Of course, those training things are really important for all these other reasons we just talked about. But that's essentially what training is for me. I have a pro tip for you guys. That'll be the kind of last thing I give. And I'm glad that it waited till the end because it makes more sense when we've talked about everything. Um, you guys need to learn how to fall better. It's going to be the blank statement here for my pro tip. Everybody needs to learn how to fall better. I still need to learn how to fall better. And I'm not talking about landing. I'm not talking about tucking and those things. I'm talking about when you are actually falling in climbing. Try to look like you're still climbing. Try to still be climbing when you're falling. In fact, I think the best rock climbers are the ones who look like they're actively climbing while they are falling. And the purpose here isn't to actually look like anything. That's not the point. But climbers who fall and look like they're still doing the move in slow motion are going to get much closer to sticking that move quicker. And lots of active mechanics have to work out together. Sorry, this is a blank statement, period. Lots of active mechanics have to work out together and with the right amount of timing, power, positioning in order to stick hard climbing movements, period, right? Like those things matter. We've talked about mechanics so many times in this podcast and in my coaching. Those things are really important. What your foot's doing and what your other foot's doing and what your arms are doing actively throughout a climbing movement is what sticks climbing movements most of the time, successfully and well. Just because one or two of these things fails, which is why you fall, it doesn't mean that the other 6, 7, or 8 things that are happening successfully don't have to be repeated. pay attention. That's the pro tip. When you're falling, pay attention. If you fall this way, and you pay attention, you're gonna learn way, way, way quicker. I promise.
Dude, what you said actually is a huge deal. This idea of when you fall, if you are actually going for the move like you're going to do, and then you actually fall instead of kind of half-assing it, kind of
Mhm.
falling and just, oh, I tapped the hold, but really moving like you're doing the move and falling because you've something failed and everything else was still firing at 100%, but then it failed. Yeah, that is rare to see. So many people just jump off. They don't realize
Mhm.
it, but they're jumping off, and and me as well. I'm not saying that I don't.
Right.
And
And
it's
sometimes there's
actually
reasons that are healthy to do that, right? Like, if you're gonna strain
yeah
yourself,
yeah
maybe
yeah yeah.
that'd be the only good reason to actually quit before you try to do a movement till failure.
This is actually something that I recognize how much this is one of my favorite things about sport climbing is that I struggle with committing to good technique and try hard when I get really pumped. And this also
Mhm.
happens if you get afraid and you feel like you're going to take a big fall. And but it feels so good to really climb each move the way you know you're supposed to and put it all out there. And then when you fall, it kind of happens out of nowhere. And that's actually that's this old I called it the French style when I was first starting to climb, and the French were really the ones. And this was all sport climbing is when I was coming up. And they just when they would fall, you just never saw it coming. Oh, Gibet is just cruising. He's gonna go forever, and then he'd fall, and you'd think, "Why did he fall?" And I love it. It's, "Oh, I
Quitter.
was tired," or, I was tired." And and what he means is that he literally climbed perfectly until he fell. And, that's something you see in Adamant, he's screaming through these moves, but he's not flailing around in desperation. He's trying to his absolute limit and keep sticking these holds when you think he's gonna come off. And I think that's I think your pro tip is a huge deal, and so thanks for sharing that. I think that was a really,
Oh,
really good
yeah.
one. Yeah.
I think a lot of my moments where I've learned climbing theory the best, where I've learned sequencing the best is from falling. It's from falling and paying attention to my fall. I'm the first and the quickest to tell anybody why I fell. I know exactly what happened. I don't need to look at my videos anymore. I don't, right? I like looking at them. I like looking at what's happening and I'm like, "Oh, fascinated. Like that's cool that my body did that." But I know what happens when I fail. I also know when I'm watching climbers that I coach exactly what happens. And I'll be able to tell them what happens before I show them on video and they don't even know it. Most people don't even know it. Improve your ability to fall. Improve your ability to analyze your falls because it teaches you more than anyone or anything will teach you in climbing. You're making these points about these successful rock climbers and what they look like when they're going to their limit. Well, that's because they're always trying to stay on the wall. And you'll ask a lot of really strong climbers on really hard power endurance rips, like, like, oh, but you just were, on the wall for so long. It's like, well, I thought I was gonna fall way before that, right? Most climbers probably will tell you that. Like, I was just trying super, super hard and I happened to stay, like I happened to work. Cause I know things that will probably promote success. It doesn't feel like I'm gonna succeed because it feels hard all the time, but I'm trying the whole time. And if I fell, it's because I failed. I failed to do something with my body, or I failed because I wasn't strong enough, literally, right? Stop telling yourself you're not strong enough. Prove you're not strong
Boom. I just don't wanna say anything after that. Alright.
enough. Fuck yeah.
Prove it. We all know, Tim, that the reason you fell is because you didn't get those hangboard numbers up. Okay, sarcasm. That's not what the podcast was about. If you thought that was true, listen, click rewind, let's do it all over again. Hey, good times, Tim. I'm glad we got to do this one.
Good
And,
times.
yeah, man, until next time.
See you on the next one. See ya.
Later, bud.
Boom.